Hello and welcome to the first edition of the NB Update, a roundup of news from the NB Media Co-op. I'm David Gordon-Koch, reporting from Moncton. On today's show, we'll bring you an update on the relationship between the provincial government and First Nations communities. In an open letter, the chiefs of all 6 Wolastoqey communities in New Brunswick criticized the Higgs government for centralizing those relationships under the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. The letter, released on Friday, October 6, says that all discussions with First Nations are now funneled through a group of expensive corporate lawyers who answer only to Premier Blaine Higgs. During a recent legislative committee meeting, Minister of Environment Gary Crossman said he believed that First Nations chiefs met with Premier Blaine Higgs on a weekly basis. But that's not the case, according to the group Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick and the First Nations chiefs themselves.
I do believe, I stand to be corrected, that there's meetings every Friday with the chiefs, isn't there, with the Premier and the Minister?
Not with the Wolastoqey chiefs.
Pardon me?
No, not with the Wolastoqey chiefs.
Meanwhile, Minister of Aboriginal Affairs Arlene Dunn has issued a lengthy statement defending her department, which has seen its mandate grow since 2021. We'll have more on that story right after some more news and information. First up, some community leaders are welcoming news that Ambulance New Brunswick, or ANB, will return to the practice of dispatching medical emergency calls to fire departments. This story comes from Erica Butler, a reporter for CHMA, the campus community radio station in Sackville. CHMA previously reported that because of a change in protocol in January, the ANB dispatch service would no longer contact local fire departments to help with medical emergencies. In Memramcook, the fire chief said they previously received between 10 and 20 medical calls every month before the change in protocol wiped out those calls almost completely. A spokesperson for Medavie Blue Cross, the organization that runs Ambulance NB, told CHMA the practice of contacting fire departments was no longer sustainable. But that change raised concerns that area residents would face preventable deaths without access to life-saving emergency services. Now CHMA is reporting that Ambulance New Brunswick listened to those concerns and that local medical first responders from fire departments are back on call in a dozen communities across the province. You can read the full story on our website, nbmediacoop.org, or at chmafm.com. In other news, the New Brunswick Archives in Fredericton was recently home to an event honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. It's called the Red Shawl Campaign, and the event took place on Monday, October 2nd. Imelda Purley, a Wolastoqey elder and former UNB elder in residence, created the campaign in 2015, inspired by the Red Dress campaign in Western Canada. Around 50 people gathered at the Provincial Archives to hear the expo and participate in a water ceremony to bring healing. And you can read a report by NB Media Co-op writer and editor Sophie M. Lavoie for more details about that story on our website at nbmediacoop.org. And in case you missed it, the NB Media Co-op recently held its 14th annual general meeting featuring a keynote speech by Mustafa Henaway. He's a migrant justice activist with the Immigrant Workers Center in Montreal and a scholar who recently published a book with Fernwood Publishing called Essential Work, Disposable Workers. The publisher says this book looks at the quote, massive expansion of precarious work under neoliberalism and how migrant workers are challenging the conditions of their hyper-exploitation through struggles for worker rights and justice.
And so the examples in the book that I look at are some of the major outward flows of people, where people are immigrating from as migrant workers the most. And so I look at Mexico, the Philippines, Egypt, and Guinea. And also these are personal examples too of where a lot of our members at the Immigrant Workers Center had come from, and they'd either come as asylum seekers or as migrant workers. And one of the claims in the book that I try to make is that what globalization has done is actually not led to the development of countries in the global south, but has led actually to the exporting of people as being their only option.
That was Mustafa Henaway delivering the NB Media Co-op's 14th annual keynote speech on September 20th. You can listen to his full presentation on our website. Again, that's nbmediacoop.org. And now for our main story. Wolastoqey Nation leaders say that relationships with the province have gone downhill with a trend towards the centralization of relationships under the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. Meanwhile, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs has issued a lengthy statement defending this approach, saying the department's mandate has grown as it pursues what it calls a meaningful nation-to-nation relationship with each First Nation. In response, the 6 chiefs of the Wolastoqey Nation communities released a statement saying the changes are not helping. It's the latest sign of a tense relationship between Indigenous communities and the Higgs government in New Brunswick. The issue came up recently during legislative committee hearings on clean energy. Those hearings included a presentation by officials from Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick, an advisory body that provides support to those 6 First Nations. Here's Dara Beaver, the executive director of that group.
Our recent experience with the province of New Brunswick has been characterized by challenges with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. Most progressive governments have sought to decentralize relationships with Indigenous communities and governments to ensure that the spirit of reconciliation and respect is imbued across all departments. Our experience is that New Brunswick has adopted the opposite approach, and it's a problematic approach in centralizing our relationships with the government to one department. In terms of where we're at with negotiations with the province of New Brunswick, I'm going to call on Jillian Paul, who was the former executive director and our legal advisor, to speak to the turn in the relationship with the provincial government.
Currently, we are not undertaking any negotiations with the provincial government, and a lot of our negotiation tables did stop around the time that our communities filed a title claim. And I think you had asked in the earlier part of your question what consultation should look like, what the ideal would be, where the bar should be, and I think Dara touched on that in her presentation. For us, consultation needs to happen as early in the process as possible. Oftentimes we find that when we're consulted, it's really at the end of the project when it seems like the decision on the project has already been made, and consultation is merely a blowing off steam process for First Nations, and another hurdle or a checkbox in the process in order to get project approval. So ideally, the consultation would start as early on as possible, and it would do, as Dara outlined in her presentation, and it would be co-decision making, co-management on these projects.
And that was Jillian Paul, a legal advisor for Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick, and before that, Dara Beaver, the group's executive director. Well, the relationship between First Nations and the provincial government has been marked by tension and conflict in recent years. The issues at play range from land title disputes to systemic racism and police violence. But the latest complaints seem to come as a surprise to one cabinet minister. Here's Gary Crossman, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, during the September 26th hearings.
Interesting you should say that departments aren't working together, because I sincerely thought we were. I know with environment and climate change, they do reach out. Aboriginal Affairs, the Minister's office too. I do believe, I stand to be corrected, that there's meetings every Friday with the chiefs, isn't there, with the Premier and the Minister?
Not with the Wolastoqey chiefs.
Pardon me?
No, not with the Wolastoqey chiefs, meetings with the
Yeah,
minister.
I don't know who's involved in the meetings, but I understand there's meetings on a regular basis, and maybe if that's the case, maybe get on the agenda or on the weekly calls. My understanding that there's regular meetings that take place for information sharing, and certainly keep us up to speed.
And you just heard from Gary Crossman, Minister of Environment for the provincial government, speaking to Dara Beaver, Executive Director of the group Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick. Well, the 6 Wolastoqey chiefs later issued a statement referencing Gary Crossman's remarks. They said in the statement on October 6, New Brunswick's Environment Minister misstated that Premier Blaine Higgs has been having weekly meetings with First Nations chiefs in New Brunswick. He hasn't been. The New Brunswick Media Co-op reached out to the Department of Aboriginal Affairs with an interview request recently. Instead, we received a 1,300-word statement attributed to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Arlene Dunn. It didn't directly address questions about Minister Crossman's remarks. However, the statement details how the Department of Aboriginal Affairs has seen its mandate grow in size since Dunn's appointment as minister in 2020. The department is now responsible for coordinating all of the province's initiatives with First Nations, according to the statement. The statement acknowledges frustrations, delays, and wasted efforts, which it says previously stemmed from problems in how the province carried out its consultations with Indigenous communities. But according to Dunn's statement, there was no legal failure identified in the province's consultations with First Nations. And although it admits there is room for improvement, it says the duty to consult process is now consistently applied. And you can read the full statement from the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. It's linked to an article on our website at nbmediacorp.org. You can read it there. As for the Wolastoqey chiefs, they say that following those centralization reforms under Minister Arlene Dunn, all discussions are funneled through a group of expensive lawyers who answer only to Premier Blaine Higgs. The statement from the Wolastoqey chiefs also suggests that Environment Minister Crossman, who is responsible for several files affecting First Nations, hasn't been properly briefed by this new centralized system. The statement adds, "We are not being consulted, a constitutional requirement and legally protected right." Well, for the record, we will leave you with the presentation by Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick at the Standing Committee on Climate Change and Environmental Stewardship. This is from September 26th. For the NB Media Co-op, I'm David Gordon-Koch. Thanks for watching.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting the Wolastoqey Nation to speak to the Committee on the development of a clean energy strategy for New Brunswick, specifically on studying pathways to decarbonization. I am pleased to be here in my role as the Niganutbut, the Executive Director of the Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick. The Wolastoqey Nation in New Brunswick, or WNNB, is the technical advisory body which provides advice to the chiefs and leaders of the 6 Wolastoqey communities in New Brunswick, including Madawaska, Nugutguk, Woodstock, Billich, Zidunsisk, and Wolastoqey. Our organization is governed by a board of directors made up of the 6 Wolastoqey chiefs and staffed by knowledgeable experts, including my colleagues here with me today, Jillian Paul to my right, who is our WNNB legal advisor and in-house governance advisor, and Ryan Dunbar, who's an engineer from Billich and is our energy advisor. In the back, I also have to the left Dr. Jason Hall, our ethnohistorian, and Dr. Colin Curry, our fisheries biologist, as well as Ian Peach, our consultation manager, and a lot of other support in the room, both administratively and technically in the various resource areas. In 2018, WNNB submitted to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development on Bill C-69. In that submission, we noted, consider all uses of lands and resources, not just for traditional purposes. Strictly considering the current use of land and resources for traditional purposes will have the effect of freezing rights in time, which would exclude the evolution of rights that occurs over time in response to new circumstances and changes in the environment. We want to be clear that we recognize the importance of developing clean energy solutions with 2 critical caveats. 1, the development of clean energy solutions in the province must be done in respect for the holistic environment. And 2, it must be done with respect of our constitutionally protected rights. For thousands of years, our communities have lived by a holistic worldview, fully integrating the health of plants, animals, water, soil, and air of our homeland with the health of our people and communities. A way in my language to describe this is Nadil Nabamig, all my relations. A word that demonstrates that we are related to everyone and everything around us. Through this principle, I am related to all of you, and the river that flows a block away, and the creatures in and around it, and all elements in our environment. In service to Ndilnabamig. We uphold sophisticated knowledge, technology, economic, social structures, and governance practices that are based upon mutual respect. In this regard, our ancestors have taught us to be the original stewards of the environment of the Wolastoqey. Sadly, our communities have witnessed centuries of colonial destruction in service of industrialization, capitalism, and satisfying the growing energy needs of human society through exploitation of carbon fuel. Humanity's predominant reliance of burning fossil fuels for energy has been and continues to be disastrous on the health of Ndilnabamig. For these reasons, we support decarbonization and eliminating a reliance on fossil fuels and the move towards clean energy, so long as it is truly clean and respects our rights. As a starting point, let's discuss what clean energy means and does not mean through the lens of Ndilnabamig. Defining what clean energy is becomes very important because in the past, the province has undertaken energy projects under the flag of clean energy that are, in fact, not respectful of the delicate intricacies of the environment and are certainly not respectful of our rights. As an example, hydroelectric dams have been promoted as a source of clean energy by some. Unfortunately, they have been the source of grave risk and challenges to Ndilnabamig. Their efforts on our lands and resources, people, plants, and animals, cultural traditions, and our rights do not make them concretely clean energy development. Since the 1760s, colonizers have harnessed the energy of our rivers with hundreds of small dams and eventually several big ones. These dams have flooded our communities and eroded parts of others, submerged sacred prayer sites and burial grounds, flooded some of our best and most accessible fiddlehead and sweetgrass areas, created barriers for our navigation, blocked fish passage, and destroyed habitat, contributing to the declines of species like Atlantic salmon and striped bass. They've killed migrating fish passing through the turbines and spillways, helped spread non-native species such as smallmouth bass, muskellunge, and muskellunge that compete with native species such as Atlantic salmon and brook trout. These dams have altered the natural flow and conditions of the rivers with devastating consequences on fish life cycles. And they've created warmer surface water conditions where nutrient overload causes algae blooms that are toxic to human and animal life. While they are often named as a source of clean energy, dams in this province have destroyed elements of the river system. Generating hydroelectric power in the way it has been done in this province is not a source of clean energy. There are ways to achieve hydroelectric power generation in a balanced and respectful way with thought, care, and investment of time and relationships, like through proper and meaningful collaboration with our First Nations communities. When considering forestry, hydrocarbons, and mining, there is a difference between the careful, sustainable harvesting of resources like small-scale individual wood burning and the widespread unsustainable cutting of our forests that came with colonization. Our ancestors witnessed careless deforestation, which has paved the way for ongoing irresponsible forestry practices for paper, textile, and other manufacturing. These practices continue to negatively impact the health of our forests, including edible plants and medicines, and animals. The burning of wood for energy has been replaced with the growing dependency on fossil fuels, which continues to perpetuate the cycle of harm on our environment. The province has also been advocating for ongoing and planned extraction of coal, shale gas, magnesium, tungsten, molybdenum, and other earthen materials in the name of clean energy and participating in the energy economy. This mining activity severely threatens our water quality, destroys important plant and animal habitat, contaminates fish and wildlife, making them unsafe to consume in normal quantities, and renders areas inaccessible to community members who wish to exercise harvesting rights. It changes the climate, which makes the populations of plants, wildlife, and fish that we rely on less abundant and less predictable. As our Premier's comments this past May in Europe revealed, this government appears to be determined to aggressively get on with its shale gas development ambitions, despite Indigenous concerns about the industry's adverse impacts. As we have known, and as has been recognized by governments and international organizations for decades now, the burning of fossil fuels is unhealthy. Our air quality suffers, and each year our rivers and oceans are polluted with liquid gases and oils from industrial and private sources, which harm fish, birds, and other animals, and can render stretches of water in plant communities too toxic for community members to safely or confidently use. Now, plastics, a product made from fossil fuels, are also contaminating many of the terrestrial and marine species we consume. Good policy and outcomes are built on good processes and meaningful engagement. If I can make one concrete recommendation to this committee today, it is that the First Nations of this province, and specifically the Wolastoqey, must be involved in all project planning processes from the earliest stages with relevant government departments. Positive Indigenous relationships cannot function through a funnel of one government department. The Wolastoqey submit to this committee that the government of New Brunswick consistently, reliably, and in good faith fulfill the Crown's duty to consult and accommodate Indigenous people's rights and interests under the principle of free, prior, and informed consent contained in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that consistent, reliable, and in good faith joint decision-making with First Nations government is foundational to building a clean energy strategy and economy for this province. The Wolastoqey can and want to help achieve a clean energy strategy when we become genuine full partners in developing and evolving together. Even projects perceived to have small footprints add up. Mines to extract the minerals needed for clean energy production and storage, dam head ponds and blocked waterways, land sprayed for toxic chemicals to allow the development of electrical transmission lines, large-scale wind and solar energy projects, which could prevent our communities from exercising and harvesting rights. This accumulated impact for our culture and way of life is a slow death by 1,000 cuts. An essential step is to modernize New Brunswick's environmental legislation and regulations. The current regulations are outdated. They do not provide a rigorous or independent enough review to encourage the development of projects that are clean. They also do not provide an adequate review of the impacts of projects on Indigenous peoples, our lands, our resources, and our rights. There are many examples across Canada and around the world of functional, respectful, co-management processes. New Brunswick can and should learn from those. The Wolastoqey also see economic opportunities that a clean energy strategy can open up, especially for Indigenous peoples. With our Indigenous knowledge about the environment and innovative ideas, we are uniquely placed to offer creative thinking specific to this land and these waters, which could really advance a clean energy strategy. The Wolastoqey, however, have been denied the right to participate for far too long. When our communities remain marginalized, we all lose, including the province and the government. We need to be recognized by the government as a source of knowledge and ideas, given the opportunity to contribute to building and implementing a provincial clean energy strategy and be beneficiaries of government support to encourage creative ideas and creative action to convert society to a clean energy society. We can be part of the solution, and we can help government build an energy strategy that is both clean and respects Aboriginal and treaty rights. In conclusion, I want to reiterate 3 key points. We recognize the importance of developing clean energy solutions so long as it is done with respect for the holistic environment. Number 2, we recognize the development of clean energy solutions so long as it is done with respect for our constitutionally protected rights. And 3, on all matters that involve the lands, waters, and resources of this province, including the development of a clean energy strategy, we want to be equal partners in decision-making with government. We are here, and we seek to be respected and meaningfully engaged. Waliwin, Wolastoqey, Sidawen, thank you for listening. And Natepso, that's it.